Nothing else?
Mm-hmm. Everyone we found so far has been up in the hills. Way above the waterline. We must be due one hell of a storm.
It'll start before sunset.
Guess we won't have to water the crop.
In the swirling undercurrents of Louisiana's history, a saga of power, crime, and political machinations unfolds, revealing a tapestry where the worlds of mafia kingpins and political masterminds not only collide, but intertwine, crafting a narrative as old as the American pursuit of power itself. From the early 1900s through the tempestuous decades of the 40s and even into the 80s, Louisiana bore witness to a unique symbiosis between organized crime and the political elite. This relationship was immortalized in a Sicilian saying, "I politici hanno bisogno della mafia e la mafia ha bisogno dei politici. L'uno non può esistere senza l'altro," which translates to, "Politicians need the mafia, and the mafia need the politicians. One cannot exist without the other." At the heart of this intricate dance of power was a figure both revered and feared, a political colossus who walked the thin line between lawful governance and underworld dealings, Huey Long, the indomitable Kingfish of Louisiana, whose influence rippled through the streets, the halls of power, and the annals of history itself. In the shadowy corridors of the 30s, the narrative takes a dramatic turn with the likes of Luciano, Frank Costello, and the New York Mafia joining forces, with Louisiana's own heavy hitters, including the legendary Huey Long and their Chicago counterparts who were Jake Guzik, Paul Ricker, and Accardo, in a clandestine crusade to secure enough delegates to champion Franklin D. Roosevelt into the White House. Costello, with a masterstroke of strategic genius, swayed Long to throw his formidable support behind FDR. Their efforts bore fruit as Roosevelt clinched the primaries and sailed to victory over the unpopular Herbert Hoover, marking a watershed moment where organized crime emerged as a kingmaker in American politics. However, Roosevelt's ascension heralded a turning point in the saga. Disgusted by the Mafia's stranglehold over politics, FDR embarked on a crusade against organized crime, targeting the very architects of his rise to power. In a dramatic showdown, figures like Dutch Schultz, Luciano, and Costello found themselves in the crosshairs, with some fleeing to the safety of Havana, Cuba, and others meeting a more violent end. Yet amidst this battle, FDR dared not confront the enigmatic Huey Long, whose charisma and influence mirrored his own, for Long commanded a loyalty and power that even the president chose not to test. Huey Long and his family played a pivotal role in offering Frank Costello protection when the mayor of New York began to dismantle Costello's slot machine operations. Despite these setbacks, Costello managed to secure new political protection, notably from Huey Long. This partnership was so profitable that Luciano once remarked they could afford to buy Long solid gold pants, emphasizing the immense wealth being generated. It is estimated that the Mafia was funneling about $200,000 a month directly into Long's pockets. This staggering amount of money highlights the extent of control and influence the Mafia had in Louisiana and parts of the South during this period. The tale further twists during the 1948 election, introducing Tom Dewey, the man who had once ensnared Luciano, only to later broker an audacious deal for his release. Dewey's bid for the presidency, bolstered by unexpected Mafia support, intersects with another pivotal figure, Earl Warren, whose future role in the Warren Commission would etch his name into history. Together, Dewey and Warren, despite their links to the Mafia, fought against Harry S. Truman in an election that underscored the indelible connection between organized crime and political ambition. The intricate web of connections between politicians, organized crime, and intelligence agencies provides a fascinating lens through which to view the evolution of American politics, especially during the tumultuous mid-20th century. Central to this narrative is Harry S. Truman, who holds the distinction of being the only U.S. president to authorize the use of nuclear weapons. Yet, the intrigue of this era extends far beyond Truman's presidency. Earl Warren, known for his later role in heading the Warren Commission. Investigating John F. Kennedy's assassination had earlier brushes with organized crime, highlighting the complex interplay between law enforcement and the criminal underworld. The Warren Commission itself included figures with indirect ties to organized crime, such as Hale Boggs, a Democratic representative from Louisiana. Boggs and others on the commission were linked to influential mob figures like Carlos Marcello, underscoring the pervasive influence of organized crime in politics. The narrative deepens with mentions of Allen Dulles, former head of the CIA, and politicians such as John Cooper from Kentucky and Richard Russell, who had their connections to organized crime, particularly in the southern United States. These connections underscore the significant influence of the Southern Mafia, painting a picture of a political landscape deeply intertwined with criminal elements. The assassination of President Kennedy is often viewed through the prism of these complex relationships, suggesting that understanding the power dynamics between politicians, organized crime, government agencies, and intelligence operations is crucial to grasping how such a seismic event could occur and go unpunished. The support of the Mafia was not just a factor in the Kennedy brothers reaching the White House, but was also pivotal in the careers of other prominent politicians like Dwight Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, Harry S. Truman, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. The adage attributed to Russell Bufalino, "If they can make you, they can break you," encapsulates the volatile power dynamics of the time, indicating that the Mafia's ability to elect a president came with the implicit threat of also being able to dethrone them. Bufalino's statement to Frank Sheeran the night before his appreciation dinner sent a shiver down Sheeran's spine. "If they can whack a president, they can whack a president of a union, no problem," encapsulates a chilling reality of power, influence, and the impunity with which organized crime operated during its zenith in American history. To be an effective Mafia boss, it was essential to control the political structure within your own state. This meant having sway over a significant number of office holders, including district attorneys, prosecutors, judges, and senators. Carlos Marcello exemplified this level of influence, particularly in Louisiana, where he was reputed to have every member of the government under his thumb. Jim Garrison, the district attorney of New Orleans, even considered Marcello not only a good friend, but also an honorable businessman, merely a humble tomato salesman. This perspective persisted all the way up until 1978, when Garrison was called to testify in front of Professor Blakey during the House Select Committee on Assassinations hearings. This complex web of relationships reveals the deep roots of organized crime in American politics and the significant challenges faced by John F. Kennedy as he confronted entrenched interests in Louisiana and the broader South. Kennedy's bold stance against these powerful entities marked a pivotal moment in American history, reflecting the enduring struggle between law and order and the shadowy world of organized crime. Carlos Marcello was an embodiment of danger and ruthlessness, amassing a staggering fortune of over $2 billion from his racketeering empire that spanned Louisiana and other southern states. An overwhelming 80% of this colossal sum was funneled directly into the murky depths of corruption, purchasing politicians, judges, senators, and other public officials as if they were mere commodities. Marcello's influence was so pervasive that he boasted more loyalists embedded within the government than soldiers on the streets. A poignant testament to his menacing philosophy greeted every visitor in his office. A plaque prominently displayed, easily overlooked upon entry, but impossible to ignore on departure. It bore a chilling maxim: 3 can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. This was not just a warning, it was a mantra. Marcello operated with a cold, calculated discretion, ensuring that no trail could ever lead back to him. Anyone deemed a threat or capable of incrimination was swiftly silenced. Marcello was a shadowy figure, a master of manipulation who believed that true power thrived out of sight. He viewed his underlings with a discerning eye, always reminding them that those who dare to soar too close to the sun inevitably get burned. To Marcello, wealth was trivial compared to the allure of honor, power, and influence. He was the quintessence of a mafioso, a man who, even in whispers, evoked fear and commanded respect. This was a man for whom the term Mafia seemed too pedestrian. He was not just part of the mob, he was the dark heart of it, a legend woven into the fabric of criminal history. Thus the saga of Louisiana's intertwining worlds of mafia kingpins and political kingfish unveils a narrative of power, betrayal, and survival, where the lines between law and lawlessness blur and the quest for power knows no bounds. In this article I'm about to show you, you will dive into a riveting exploration that uncovers the entangled saga of the Long family, a narrative steeped in the rich tapestry of Louisiana's history and its political theatre. This article unfurls the legacy of Huey Long and traverses the intricate pathways of a state known for its distinctive political breed, a breed that consistently captivates and caters to the unique demands of Louisiana's citizens. Prepare to be enthralled by tales of the mafioso underworld, where Carlos Marcello reigned supreme as the Mafia kingpin, and Huey Long, dubbed the political titan, wielded unparalleled influence. The Long dynasty emerges as a formidable force, with a lineage adorned with senators, judges, and political savants, strategically placed within the government's echelons, all under the protective umbrella of the Mafia's vast empire. This article is not just a historical recount. It is an epic saga that vividly paints the vivid landscape of Louisiana politics, where the lines between legality and criminality blur. Whether you hail from a lineage of political royalty like the Long family, the one we will discuss today, or the Bush family, the Connolly family, the Harrisons, Roosevelts, the Tafts, and the Lodges, or find your roots intertwined with figures such as Senator Johnson, the narrative remains unchanged, a tale of power, ambition, and the unbreakable bonds between the political and criminal elite. Prepare to embark on a journey through the heart of the South, unveiling the types of politicians who roamed its corridors of power, and the shadowy figures who pulled the strings from behind the gilded curtain. This is not just history. It is an enthralling chronicle of the American South's political and criminal dynasties, laid bare for all to see. Here is the article, which was written on August 30th, 1948. As governor of Louisiana, swaggering, shifty-eyed Earl Long has hardly been able to spit, scratch, or take off his shoes without rousing a disconcerting ghost. During his 3.5 months in office, the legend of his brother Huey has dominated and overshadowed him, almost as thoroughly as the live Kingfish did during the noisy years of the Great Louisiana Hayride. Huey's roads, Huey's bridges, Huey's schools, and Huey's friends and enemies are everywhere that Earl goes. Earl works in Huey's 34-story skyscraper capital and lives in Huey's governor's mansion, an imitation White House, which the Kingfish erected in Baton Rouge so he would feel at home when he became president. Back parish voters eye Earl beadily to see that he acts like Huey would have wanted. At times, it is almost more than Earl can bear. At a press conference held shortly after he was elected governor, he cried, "Huey couldn't have been elected dog catcher without my help." But these honest outbursts of rage and envy have been infrequent. Earl has aped his brother with the beetle-browed assiduousness of a vaudeville baboon learning to roller skate. He rubs himself with the legend of Huey's greatness like a voodoo worshipper using fast dice oil. Old Earl. He has none of Huey's wild, magnetic appeal. At 53, he is a soft, dumpy man with a mushy voice, a flaccid handshake, a venomous temper, and the general bearing of a small-town pool hall operator. Crowds bother him, and he cannot hide a furtive wariness when job seekers approach him. He is a dedicated horse player, who makes $2 bets, but he has the long look and a shrewd insight into the mind of Louisiana's tobacco-chewing common man. He calls himself Old Earl, and gets up as early as 5:30 in the morning to let visitors wander into the governor's mansion. He appoints colonels with a lavish hand, some 250 to date, and presents lesser fry with penknives after first exacting a penny, so a friendship won't be cut. He enjoys the feel of clean white suits, but he never allows his interest in the finer things to interfere with a certain honest vulgarity. On the day after he was elected governor, he asked friends to his house, spread out a copy of the anti-Long New Orleans item, and spent the afternoon spitting on it, champagne and talcum. Last week he was genuflecting more vigorously than usual before his brother's memory. He was doing everything in his power to get Huey's 29-year-old son Russell elected to the U.S. Senate. He sent his big, tough-looking Lieutenant Governor Bill Dodd out on the road to blast Russell's closest competitor, Judge Robert F. Kennan, who had also had the audacity to oppose Earl for governor last January. They tested Judge Kennan when he left the army, Dodd bayed at Country Crossroads. They tested his feet and said they were no good for running. They tested his blood and said it was 65% champagne and 35% talcum powder. They tested his ears, and the doctor said, "Judge, your ears are perfect. You can hear an election coming 2 years off." As Russell himself described it to delighted audiences, the Longs had the judge changing and shifting like a mosquito dodging through a barrage of flit. Russell, the gambler's choice, was cocky and confident. Contemplating all this, the cynical wondered if Earl was not booby-trapping himself. His nephew Russell had been left a priceless heritage. He looked and acted like Huey. The sight of Russell up on the stump, just like his daddy, stirred the faithful as Earl could never stir them. Russell had gotten more applause than Earl at Earl's own inauguration. Moreover, Russell was smart, personable, well-educated, and had a good war record. He was a comer, power. But whatever the future held, Earl's obeisance to the shades of the Kingfish had paid him well. He had used Huey's tricks, Huey's share-the-wealth philosophy, and Huey's lavishness with political promises for an ironic end, to prove to himself that he was a better man than Huey. And he had squeezed more dictatorial powers from Louisiana's supine legislature than Huey, or any governor of any U.S. state, had ever held. Earl has absolute control over more than 40 state boards, departments, and commissions. He holds the liquor industry under his thumb by means of a board with vast regulatory powers. He can influence Louisiana's $204 million oil industry, its $14 million sulfur industry, its $112 million lumber industry, through his Conservation Commission. He controls the Civil Service Commission, which had been independent of politics for 8 years. He has pulled Louisiana State University, where the bonfire of scandal burst after Huey's death, back under the governor's domination. New Orleans, which is still run by his enemy, Reform Mayor Chep Morrison, has already felt his displeasure. By giving the state a bigger share of the city's income, sales tax, cigarette tax, revenue from horse racing, Earl's legislature has cut $3 million of New Orleans revenue. It has ordered the city to re-adopt the aldermanic form of government, which New Orleans abandoned by referendum in 1912, thus robbing the mayor of almost all power. Bunches of lies. Criticism of this program sends Earl into spasms of profane counter-denunciation, particularly when it comes from Louisiana's anti-Long newspapers. Reporters who can catch him enjoying the luxury of his daily shave at the King Hotel barbershop can occasionally wheedle some news out of him. But he is adept at dodging, and when tracked down is apt to indulge in nothing more informative than a tirade on the evil inherent in the journalistic mind. A Time reporter who found him at the mansion early one morning last week came away with a typical Long interview. "I've got nothing to tell your office," said the governor. "I don't need their help to run this state." "But, Governor, I've got nothing to tell that blood-sucking bunch of liars. They wouldn't print the truth anyhow." "Tell them they're a bunch of blood-sucking liars." "Will they print that?" "I'll see." "Well, tell them they're a blood-sucking bunch of liars anyway." "Will you do that?" "All right." All they print is a bunch of lies. How to make friends. To millions of US citizens, the whole phenomenon of Louisiana's second surrender to one of the Long tribes seems almost unbelievable. Why, having painfully cleaned out the last vestiges of the Huey Long regime, did Louisiana welcome back a man who promised to improve on everything Huey did? The answer stemmed in part from the admitted accomplishments of Huey Long's regime. To Huey's common ordinary man, the Kingfish was a kind of back-parish Robin Hood, the first politician in memory who seemed to want to do something dramatic for him. Huey's roads, bridges, free school books, and thousands of state jobs might have been delivered for political effect, but they made life more tolerable for thousands of Louisiana's poor whiteys. Furthermore, the Longs belonged in the Louisiana tradition. They were not the first of Louisiana's swashbuckling politicos. From its earliest days, Louisiana was a country of great riches and grinding poverty, a melting pot where French, Irish, Germans, Spanish, and rude Kentuck rivermen mingled and brawled, and where voodoo, vice, and corruption nourished as luxuriantly as sugarcane. The poor white, the easygoing French Catholic Cajuns of the coast, and the ignorant, bitter-eyed, Bible-quoting Baptist rednecks of the piney northern hill country were ignored. And in all the hill country, no poor whites were poorer, more hard-bitten, more undernourished, and more resentful than those of the parish of Wynne. Many a Louisianan said it produced only one crop, dissent. What do rich folks care? Wynne Parish was the birthplace of the Longs. Their father, Huey P. Long Sr., was luckier than most. He sold land to the railroad near the town of Winfield and grew prosperous. But he remembered poverty. "There wants to be a revolution," he would say. "What do rich folks care for the poor man? Their women don't even comb their own hair." Huey never forgot, and did not let Earl forget either. Earl was 2 years younger than Huey. He felt superior to Huey, resented him, was fascinated by him, and followed him. Huey, for all his recklessness of mind, his bold eye and wild tongue, was a physical coward. As boys, Earl fought his battles, while Huey ran panic-stricken up the road. But Huey always dominated Earl. Huey was the first to break away from home. He got a job selling cottolene, a cottonseed oil shortening, and travelled from farmhouse to farmhouse, telling stories, baking cakes, quoting the Bible, and exhorting housewives to quit using hog lard and cow butter. Earl soon bumped off across the countryside after him with a line of shoe polish, stove polish, and patent medicine. When Huey decided to study law, Earl followed suit. When Huey got into politics, Earl was at his heels. Human hospital. As governor, Huey made Earl attorney for the Orleans Parish inheritance tax collector, a $15,000 job he had promised to abolish in order to use the money for a tuberculosis hospital. Earl was soon earning his keep. In 1929, the legislature, infuriated by Huey's browbeating, set out to impeach him. In the midst of the excitement, the Kingfish threw himself on a bed and wept. But with Earl's help, he made secret forays and counterattacks. Huey had 2 methods of persuasion: cash and threats. On the eve of the impeachment proceedings, 15 state senators announced that they would not vote for impeachment, no matter what the evidence showed. That saved Huey and made him a national figure. Earl, beaded with the righteous sweat of his endeavors, thought he deserved higher honors. But Huey paid no attention. For one thing, Earl's wild temper and mode of fighting made him unpopular. During the impeachment proceedings, he sank his teeth into one legislator's throat and chewed until he was pulled off. Later, one Frank P. Krieger complained that Earl had all but bitten his finger off. Also, Huey seemed to have had doubts about Earl's political savvy. Feuding man. Earl broke with Huey, spoke of him publicly as a big-bellied coward, and set out to oppose him. It was like trying to stop a locomotive by lying across the tracks. In 1932, when Huey went about setting up his puppet governor, one O.K. Allen, a Winfield sawmill operator who had once lent him $500, Earl ran for lieutenant governor on the opposing ticket and was soundly licked, but Earl was a feuding man. The next year, when the U.S. Senate investigated charges of fraud in the Louisiana senatorial primary, Earl hurried to testify against Huey. The brothers faced each other for hours, faces distorted, arms flailing. Earl testified that Huey had told him that a man named Abel, H.C. Abel, New York representative of Electric Bond and Share Co., had given him $10,000, and Huey was sort of afraid to use it for fear it was marked. "Listen to that," screamed Huey. "Liar Earl Long." "You can't make a liar out of me," yelled Earl. "I stood with you as long as I could, but you run wild." "That's a damned lie," howled Huey. It was a triumph for Earl, but only a political mosquito bite to the Kingfish. Huey went on about his frenetic business. Earl was all but forgotten. Porcine delight. But in 1936, after Huey's assassination, the Long gang hauled him out, dusted him off and put him back into circulation. He ran for lieutenant governor along with their hand-picked candidate for governor, Dick Lesh, rhymes with flesh. The Lecce Long ticket won, but afterward nobody had time for Earl. The gang rushed to the public trough and swilled up wealth with porcine delight. Lecce, a fat and jolly man, built himself a mansion on the exclusive St. Tammany Gold Coast. George Caldwell, an even fatter man, who was construction supervisor for the burgeoning LSU campus, built an even better one. Its bathroom boasted 14-carat gold fixtures. Not to be outdone, Abe Shushan, president of the New Orleans Levee Board, built a mansion too. The New Deal, discouraged in Louisiana by Huey, was now admitted and allowed to pour in fresh millions in WPA funds. There were big cars, parties, and champagne for all. Then the bubble blew up. Dr. James Monroe Smith, president of LSU, vanished one day with his party-loving wife, Thelma. The doc had been speculating in millions of bushels of wheat and had invented a unique system of financing. Whenever his broker called for more collateral, he merely ordered the printing of more LSU bonds. He was discovered in Canada, brought home and clapped into jail. Cried Governor Lecce, "I'm flabbergasted." He took to his bed and resigned. Earl, the human football, became governor, off to prison. Earl had a dramatic chance to become a hero. But instead of crying out at the thieves who had besmirched honest Huey's memory, he said, "Smith is only one man. Jesus Christ picked 12, and one of them was a son of a gun." Then he just hung on, like a sailor lashed to the mast, while gales of scandal blew around his ears. Lecce went to prison. So did Doc Smith, George Caldwell, Abe Shushan, and Huey's campaign treasurer, Seymour Weiss. Monty Hart, a favored contractor, blew out his brains. 8 months later, at the expiration of the gubernatorial term, Earl was out of the State House. The reformers, led by an unknown young attorney named Sad Sam Jones, were in at last. Sam Jones streamlined the government, set up civil service, and spoke of getting payrolls and industry for the state. But there was not any free stuff, and there was not much excitement. In 1944, the reformers committed an act of political cowardice. They ran guitar player Jimmy Davis for governor. Davis, who wanted to go to Hollywood, was a good candidate, but a bad governor. He was just supposed to keep the seat warm until Sam Jones could come back. Last year, Earl, who had been patiently raising cattle in Wynn Parish and mending political fences, set boldly out to get the governorship again. He talked an oil millionaire named William C. Feazell into backing him. After election, he sent Feazell to the Senate to fill the late Senator John Overton's unexpired term, made Feazell's attorney Seaborn L. Digby, chairman of the Conservation Commission, which decides how much oil may be pumped from wells. Russell to the rescue. Earl cried that he and Huey had settled their differences, before the Kingfish died. At first this was a little embarrassing. One night Earl said, "Of course I disagreed with him sometimes, as a brother does." A voice from the crowd said, "We didn't." But Earl drafted his nephew Russell, and Russell told doubters, "The family is satisfied, I think that should satisfy you." As the campaign went on, Earl borrowed leaf after leaf from Huey's book. He promised the people things they would be able to see and feel: veterans' bonuses, roads, $50 a month, old age pensions. Sad Sam Jones promised too, but Earl was as specific as the Sears Roebuck catalogue. He made it plain that a vote for Long was an order for material improvement. He abused the newspapers. Like Huey, he recited Invictus: "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." He was elected by the biggest vote in Louisiana history. 422,766 cast their ballots for him. He invited everybody to his inauguration in Baton Rouge. 10,000 came, drank free pop, ate free hot dogs, and listened to free band music. Mothers were ushered into the governor's office to change their infants' diapers. He ran the unprotestingly legislature with an iron hand. His office has an electrical board which records every legislator's vote at the moment he casts it. Earl watched the board. When things slowed down, he sent for the legislators. Did they want roads? Did they want schools? When there were real difficulties, Earl swaggered down to the legislative floors, sat beside doubtful representatives, and waited for them to vote right. When the session was over, Louisiana's taxes had been almost doubled. Earl, unlike Huey, had soaked the poor as well as the rich, and he had kept his promises. Gasoline now sold for 29 cents and 31 cents a gallon. Cigarettes after next week's election would be 27 cents a package. There was grumbling. But both Earl's taxes and Earl's expenditures could be defended. Louisiana was a backward state, and in many ways Earl, like Huey, was bringing it up to standard. But what of the vast powers Earl had seized? Earl protested that he wanted to do nothing but be a good governor. He pointed proudly to the fact that he had not reinstituted deducts, the famed kickbacks from the salaries of political employees. The cynical argued that he just did not know quite what to do next. He had followed Huey's rulebook to the point where things had to be played by ear and had halted, baffled. Would he try to go on? Many a Louisianan thought Earl was remarkably like the frog, which tried to puff himself up to the size of an ox. A few more puffs, they said, and pop. No Earl. This article unveils the ascent of what is considered one of the most corrupt political dynasties in American history. It highlights how political families in the South, like the Long family, were deeply entwined with organized crime. Figures such as Mayalansky, Carlos Marcello, and others poured billions into Louisiana and other southern regions, including transforming the Vegas desert into a lucrative venture. Beyond financial investments, the South served as a training ground for exiles and far-right militiamen involved in various operations. These activities were not solely for the benefit of organized crime and corruption. They were also instrumental for leading industries and the CIA to secure influence in South America and elsewhere.